Thank you. Thank you very much, Cora. Now, item 8, which is presentation and discussion on the fiscal year 2023 education budget. And board members, you will find this in your packet, which is a presentation guide that Carolyn Thompson will review parts of.
Good morning, Superintendent, honorable members of the board. Today we present to you the FY23 budget for Common Education as passed by the legislature. You should all, I believe, have this budget book in front of you, which should be a helpful guide as we walk through the budget and the presentation. And for those in the audience, the same materials are on our website with the board materials if you'd like to follow along there as well. So the budget book includes the budget spreadsheet, a list of program descriptions that give you just a brief snippet about each of the items in the budget, a summary of each of the appropriations bills that we'll talk about today, and then a copy of this presentation. Is it going to work for me, Jeremy? There it goes. Okay. I have the touch, Cora. She left. First, I do want to discuss the budget in some detail with you today, as it's important to understand our funding sources, where they come from, and how they are allocated to districts. This is essential because sometimes our funding sources may fluctuate, and that will impact the funding that that districts then receive. This budget represents a relatively flat budget for common education, an increase of just under $17 million, or one half of 1%. But there are certainly important investments in key areas which I'll share with you today. The first bill is Senate Bill 1040, which is the General Appropriations Bill. This is, of course, the bill that funds all of the agencies of state government. Those line items from Senate Bill 1040 are kind of on the first spreadsheet that you see in your book. And then the second is House Bill 4465, which is our budget limits bill and contains the items that you see on the second spreadsheet in your book. Because the legislature passed a line item bill for education this year, there is no action to take today. So this is merely information for your understanding as we then prepare our budget requests that'll come later this fall, as you all are accustomed to receiving as in past years. Okay, to take one step deeper, Senate Bill 1040 again contains the primary line items for education, including the financial support of public schools, which is the funding formula. These funds are distributed to schools based on their weighted average daily membership. The average daily membership is a count taken of students that is then weighted to account for students that might have additional needs, including students that might be economically disadvantaged or have a disability, et cetera. All of the $2.4 million that you see here will be distributed to schools through the funding formula. And this year, the funds for the formula are exactly the same as they were in FY22 last year. Public school activities included an increase of $9 million. This is not school activity funds, as some may confuse it with things like boosters and concessions that school districts do. This is where the legislature funds many of the programs that the department conducts in various mandates of state law, and we'll cover those in more detail shortly. There was also funding to cover the flexible benefit allowance, which is, of course, our healthcare for teachers and support staff to fully fund and provide that benefit to our educators required another $17.8 million in the budget. And then last on this slide is instructional materials or textbooks, which is at $45 million. This is a decrease from last year, but is as was requested by the department and this board in the budget request, and we'll talk more about that momentarily. The School Consolidation Assistance Fund, you'll also see on that initial budget spreadsheet includes an appropriation of $4.2 million, as does the Teachers Retirement Dedicated Revenue Fund. These are both amounts that are determined rather by statute and are funds that come from the lottery. And then lastly is the compliance, oversight, and operations of the agency. We are grateful to have received an increase this year. I think maybe the first time since I've been here that the agency has received an increase, and a significant one. As we discussed in our budget request with the board and with the legislature, these funds will be used to make market rate adjustments for existing staff, hire additional staff, and make investments in various IT needs to assist us in part with complying with new legislation as it comes to IT infrastructure. Okay, I want to dig a little bit more deeply into the $2.4 billion that's appropriated to the formula. These are all items that come to us from the General Appropriations Bill. The General Revenue Fund of the state is always the biggest source of revenue that we receive from the funding formula. For the funding formula, you can see here that that was nearly $1.5 billion from the General Revenue Fund, only just slightly less than was last year. Next is the Education Reform Revolving Fund. It's more commonly referred to as the 1017 Fund. And we were appropriated $890 million from that fund. It was initially set up as a dedicated revenue stream for education in the early 1990s and has continued to be a significant source of revenue for districts since that time. Oh, missed one.
Significant source to a district. Would you repeat that last sentence?
I'm sorry?
Could you repeat your last sentence?
Yes, the 1017 fund has continued to be a significant source of revenue for districts. So all this money goes through the funding formula directly to districts. And then lastly, which I failed to mention just a moment ago, is the Common Education Technology Fund is about $47 million. And I'll describe that in a little bit more detail and just in the coming slides. Last for the formula is money that comes from the Oklahoma Lottery Trust Fund, $38 million this year, which was an uptick over FY22. And then lastly, the Mineral Leasing Fund, which is $4.9 million, 3.7 million less than in prior years. These are all required funds. These two at least are required funds to be given to education. Mineral Leasing Fund has kind of consistently undercollected the last few years. In FY22, it undercollected by $2.3 million, which meant that unfortunately in the district's June payment, they got a little surprise and got a little cut. So whenever that fund undercollected, unfortunately. So this is why we watch these funds. We watch as the revenue is coming in on a monthly basis so that we can try to determine if we're on track to collect or undercollect. The House Bill, the 1017 fund, digging a little bit more deeply into this. Again, we're still on the funding formula since it's the largest source of revenue that we have, or the largest budget item that we have. Again, total appropriation was $890 million. With an increase of 14.8 million in these funds. You can see here the sources that feed the 1017 fund. These are all what we would call apportionments, and then the legislature looks at a projection for the upcoming year for these various revenue streams and makes a projection for how much will be available for the 1017 in the coming year. And so we watch very closely when there are bills that impact the income tax, sales tax, any of the things here that you see on the screen. If there are adjustments in those made in legislative session, then that can impact the revenue source for education. And that did happen this year, only minimally, but these four bills that you can see here, at least on their face, have nothing to do with education, but together, combined, they represent a just under $1.5 million impact to the 1017 fund. So a sales tax exemption and 2 tax credits and a income tax exemption.
And just for clarification, I want to make sure I heard you right. That's a collectively, those four bills.
1.5 million.
Reduced by 1.5.
Yeah, it's very
Did you
small.
say 100 million or 1.5?
1.5 is
Thank you.
very small comparatively, but it demonstrates
But we talked about this before.
but it demonstrates the point that the things that the legislature does in session that impact various tax revenue sources do impact education. Next is the Common Education Technology Fund, which I mentioned briefly a moment ago. This fund comes completely from the gross production tax on oil. Most years, it is a fairly stable revenue source for districts unless we are having an economic crisis in the oil and gas industry, which we had a couple of years ago and received very little from this fund. But this year, things seem to be fully on track for this fund to fully collect. You can see the various tax rates and the percentage. These are, again, apportionments that are directly deposited into this fund as the state collects them. This fund does have a cap on it in statute. There is a total of $150 million that comes from these apportionments. We received just under $50 million. Higher ed receives just under $50 million. Higher ed gets the other $100 million. So there is a cap there, and it's always roughly about the same amount each year. Jennifer, did you have a question? Sorry, I saw your hand. Okay. Next is the Education Lottery Trust Fund. The total lottery funds available to appropriate to education this year were $84.5 million. 45% of that is allocated to the funding formula. So that was more than $38 million this year. Additionally, 5% of these funds are allocated to the School Consolidation Assistance Fund and to the Teachers Retirement Dedicated Revolving Fund, which is simply a pass-through through our agency. And you can see that each of those received about $4.2 million. The lottery funds go through a formula, which you can see here at the bottom of the screen. So the total amount projected for the upcoming year is then divided out by percentage into these various funds. We did have one bill that impacted lottery funding this year, as really lottery funding has continued to increase over the last several years based on some legislation that has happened that encourages, makes it easier to play the lottery, encourages lottery participation, I suppose. So the piece of legislation impacting the lottery this year is House Bill 4388. It provides an additional amount of salary to teachers who hold advanced lead and master certificates. That additional salary is funded initially by the district and then matched with state funds from the lottery using any amount over the first $65 million in annual net proceeds for salary increases. For FY23, net proceeds are projected to be approximately $57 million. So we are short about $8 million of the $65 million threshold for funds to flow over into that fund. The way the lottery works is we get a projection for the upcoming year and we get the cash from the prior year in our appropriations. That's what made up the $84 million. But because the projection for next year is only $57 million, it looks as though this fund will not receive funding this year, at least not as of right now. Next is the School Consolidation Assistance Fund. As we previously discussed, 5% of the lottery funds are appropriated to this fund, and you can see this on line 14 of your budget spreadsheet, still on the first page. Statute dictates that these funds are used to assist districts going through annexation or consolidation, and for those districts who choose to enter into a shared superintendent agreement, they can receive up to 50% of the superintendent's salary over 3 years. up to $150,000 from this fund. Additionally, this board in the past has approved expenditures from this fund for when there's a consolidation for things like severance, pay to employees, or other items that may be a cost resulting from a consolidation or annexation. The funds, however, do not continue to amass. If they exceed $5 million, then statute directs us to make an allocation to districts based on the average daily membership of students in grades 8 through 12. This year, as you can see at the bottom of the screen, we did make an allocation to districts of just over $3.7 million. Then our appropriation, again, from the lottery was $4.2 million. And so our total projected revenue for FY23 is $9.2 million. I think safe to say there will be another allocation out to districts unless we have just a rash of school consolidations, which I would not expect. But we do have typically 1 to 3 every year that consolidate, and some will apply for these funds. So once we determine what those obligations will be, then we'll make this allocation out to districts. It usually occurs sometime in the spring after we know what might be coming our way during the year. Okay, finally, moving on from the formula, instructional materials is another line item, a major line item in our budget. You can see this on line 7 of your spreadsheet. And again, the legislature has funded the textbook line item in the amount that we requested. It is a decrease, and that is based on the subject adoption cycle that the textbook committee is pursuing. So the textbook committee adopts a set of materials for a particular subject, and then the following year districts are able to purchase from that adopted list, and that's what these funds are for. So last year, I didn't put this in my notes, I believe this year is English language arts. I think it's actually in the program descriptions if you're interested. We did English language arts as one of the more expensive subjects. And so to help with the textbook cycle, we actually divided the adoption into elementary and middle and high school. So this is for elementary ELA only. So we received nearly $2 million. Again, a little less than last year. Statute requires a minimum of $55 per student. And the last 2 years, we have well exceeded that at 91.69, and this year projected $69.75 per student. Next would be the flexible benefit allowance, which has obviously continued to increase as healthcare has increased for all involved. This year, we see another $17.8 million needed to fully fund the health insurance for 88,000 teachers and support staff. So each year we base this on a projection, and then in the fall we take a new personnel count, and the new rates, premium rates, are adopted in the fall for the new calendar year. So we'll know the final amount that will be used in the spring, but the projection is that we needed slightly more this year in order to fully fund that benefit.
And as the number of teachers rises, which we hope with the teacher shortage, you will see that continue to rise as well.
And we did see the premium rate was held flat for a couple of years there. I think this was somewhat due to pandemic related concerns, and EGID, I think is their name, under OMES, used some cash reserve to help keep these rates flat. But we've basically been assured that there will be a rate increase this year because they did that for us in the prior 2 years. Okay, next is the support of students and teachers. This is the second spreadsheet. If you want to refer to that, again, this in the budget, you'll see it called public school activities. Again, this is not school activity funds, but rather programs that many of which are statutorily required and or funded by the legislature. And you can see here, we've continued to have a little bit of an uptick in this line item, which we're grateful for. Another $9 million increase this year after the significant cuts in this line item nearly 6 years ago. So within the public school activities line item, we see funding increases in a variety of areas. First is Sooner Start, which you all will remember is services to students or children rather birth through 3 who have developmental delays. And this additional $1.8 million will certainly allow us to serve more families, which is very exciting. Next is an increase in alternative education and another $2 million. Which we are also excited about to support what is surely additional students in need of alternative education services as a result of the pandemic and based on some new requirements that were passed in law a few years ago. Next is the Reading Sufficiency Act, an increase of $1 million. Again, I think to support the increased number of students who are struggling with reading below benchmark due to the pandemic, we have seen that uptick and the legislature has responded with additional funds. Lastly, on this slide, AP, teacher training and test fee assistance. This year, we received an additional $500,000 in this line item, which will be used to provide grants to districts wanting to do new AP programs. We haven't been able to do those in quite some time. I think 16 or 17 was maybe the last time we could do some of those grants. So that will be exciting for districts that want to start a new AP program. Also increased was funding for our assessment line item up to $9.2 million. We had requested additional funds, which will be used to support the peer review process and improve additional supports for teachers. And then we had an additional $500,000 for the teacher's retirement credit, which is a credit against the employee contribution to the retirement system. So this is based on existing employees in the classroom, teachers in the classroom, not retired staff. And so the counts are based on the teaching population that is currently in place. They get a little bit of a discount on the portion that they're required to pay to the retirement system through this line item. We had some new line items this year. First is a program called Imagine Reading. You might be familiar in our budget with the program Imagine Math, which we've had for a number of years now. This is its counterpart, a supplemental online reading program at $1 million. We also received funding for ACT Work Keys, $250,000. And it's intended that these funds will make this assessment-based credential tool available to high school seniors, hopefully by the fall. Third is student information security. We have talked about this, I think, with the board a number of times, concerns with the strengthening student data privacy and data security measures within our student information systems. So we are grateful that the legislature saw that need and provided some additional funding so we can continue to shore up those protections. Last here in new line items is a program called Child ID, which provides child ID kits to parents for the purpose of reducing the number of missing children. Will help parents identify their child in the event that they go missing. We understand that this amount will provide kits for approximately 175,000 students, with the remainder to be provided by private donations. And then on your right here are two programs that actually had been previously funded in the budget and were not for a couple of years, 1 year, couple of years in the other case. And so we see these returned. Funding for Great Expectations, which many of you might be familiar with, is a professional development program that is focused on setting high expectations for students and a climate of mutual respect. We just hear rave reviews about this program. And so we're glad that the legislature thought to reinvest in it. And then standards implementation to continue to support the work of this agency in developing new standards, as well as the curriculum frameworks and supports that we provide for teachers in teaching those standards. Okay. I'm sorry?
Different from the previous budget from last year, or these items?
So the four on the right are brand new. They have not been previously funded. The two on the, I'm trying to get my left and right mixed up. The two on the right were not funded in last year's budget, but they have been funded in prior year's budget. And so they are restored. And then lastly here, each of these line items appear in our budget. They all had their funding maintained, so no increase or decrease. And I won't take the time to go through each one of them since it's extensive, but I'd be happy to answer questions on any one of them or anything else that you would like to discuss as far as the budget. And that is the conclusion of the presentation.
I just wanted to say I was glad to see the Oklahoma Arts Institute still on there.
Yes.
So I'm
I think.
Yes,
anyway,
we are
I
too.
applaud them for continuing to fund that.
And those are great initiatives that we know that are transformative for our students. But one thing, if you can speak to, is Senate Bill 1147, which is for aviation. And we know how Oklahoma now, aviation is really the second largest industry in our nation, in the state. And of course, there's workforce challenges. And so we have companies coming into Oklahoma, and we want to make sure that those students in high school are prepared to be able to meet those needs. So I know that the legislature discussed and passed SB 1147 to address that, and also has the State Department of Education to be able to put forth. So what exactly is the department doing on that front?
Yeah, we are also very excited about the advancement of the aviation industry and, in fact, aviation education in our schools. We met with early on in session, I think it was, met with a large group of people who have developed a specific aviation curriculum for schools, as well as a number of the schools have already implemented the curriculum. And we are working with them. Their request is that their curriculum be able to count for core credit, so for both math and science credit. I think they have 4 units, one for each year in high school. And I believe there are 1 or 2 that are already approved for core credit, and we're working on a couple of others. We have to work in partnership with the regents on that, because the regents would have to accept them for purposes of Oklahoma's Promise. But those conversations are continuing, and I know that we've had follow-ups with them. So, and many of our districts are already using this. If short of counting for core credit, they can certainly count for elective credit right now already. And I know Ada and I think Norman, and I know there are a number of others that have already implemented that. And so we're certainly working with them to see how we can make those connections for core credit.
Okay, so it's not anything that needs to be in the budget to ensure that it's fully funded.
Not that I'm aware of at this point in time. Districts would use the funds that they receive through the funding formula to implement this program or any other sort of new coursework that they would want to provide for students. Yes, sir.
One other question I had was on the acronym NBCT.
Oh,
Does
yes.
that stand for National Board Teacher Bonus? Is that
It does.
Okay.
It does. You're correct.
So it's stipends, the notes say stipends for estimated 200 teachers. I probably should know that, but could you explain a little more about it?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is a bonus for those teachers that have received National Board Teacher Certification. It's a $5,000 bonus. Back in 2013, the legislature passed a bill to basically phase out the $5,000 bonus structure for over 10 years, because at the time the certification was a 10-year certification. And so as teachers reach their 10-year mark from their initial certification, they roll off of the $5,000 bonus structure, and there is a separate line or column rather in the salary schedule that provides additional funding at the district level for those teachers. It's like $1,000. It's not nearly as significant as the $5,000. So it's possible this year, or maybe we might have a few that carry over to next year, will be the last year, since we're approximately 10 years from when they first passed that bill in 2013. So in another year or two, this line item will be no more.
And it's really, it was a fabulous program, and so many teachers took advantage of the incentive to seek their National Board certification. It was wildly successful, and it's something that I wish there were resources for our legislature to stand up that kind of program again, because it really helped also with professional development, with the knowledge that you glean going through a very rigorous national standard for certification, but it also had a component of longevity in it that you had 10 years of staying in the classroom to qualify for that. And we have seen that really held some people in the profession. And of course, they were rewarded with a $5,000 bonus every year. I wish that we had that ability.
I think unfortunately the fact that it was wildly successful ultimately led to its downfall
Yeah,
because it increased the
Oklahoma.
obligation of the legislature.
Yeah, Oklahoma was among the largest numbers of national board certified teachers in the nation. So it is, if there's an ability to sustain such a thing, boy, that's a powerful incentive. And there's a great, there's a partnership both of the teacher initiating this. It's very extensive work that has to go into becoming nationally board certified. It goes through a board that evaluates their portfolio, their work, their training and support. So it would be something that we'd love to see again in the future. All right. Yeah. That's a great question.
Last one.
Yeah.
You said that this section here were actually new ones that were.
These are all equal funding, have been funded were funded last year and continue to be funding this year. I think maybe this
one. No.
Sorry.
That last one.
Oh, okay.
What I want to bring attention to, especially what our nation has gone through with school security and that Secure Schools program. Is this the first time that money is being allocated to that, or has it been done? Has it been the same in the past?
It has been the same in the past. We have received this, I believe, this will be the third year, I think, that we have received funding, third or fourth year that we've received funding for this. The initial year, I think it was closer to $3 million. And then the maintenance after the initial kind of startup has been this $2.35 million. And I think the exact number is in your program descriptions, but I want to say we're somewhere in the 70% implementation of school sites across the state. We have more school sites that come on to the program every year. It is extensive work. It involves a lot of they geofence the school site and uploading of all of the staff information. It's a cell phone based panic button. For those of you who are not familiar, the Safe Secure Schools program funds a panic button that you hold on your phone. You can use it for medical emergencies, which I know actually that it has been used for and deployed in the state since implementation. Fortunately, we haven't had other situations like have happened across the country since we've had this panic button, but it has certainly been used for other types of emergencies on the school grounds.
And it is also utilized, it connects with the local 911 center. And there's a lot of data that they then have access to as well that would enhance security. Schools then have had this, but it's also in hospitals, it's in some university settings in Oklahoma. And so it has been positive. It was initiated by the legislature, and I think many of them learned about the success of the program in Norman, actually, with their 911 center in Goshen. But it's scaled. Great question, though. But it is one piece of school security. There's also, we pursued multiple federal grants about 4 years ago with the Department of Homeland Security and the Department of Justice. And we're able to build out the first ever state level Oklahoma school, Office of School Safety and Security. And part of those levels of support also include behavioral threat analysis. Our rapid response crisis team comes through that. And there are a series of maybe eight or seven different components. And this is one way.
School emergency operation plans is another. We assist schools with developing an emergency operation plan.
And you mentioned that we're close to 70% of the sites.
Mhm.
will be
I think I
in-
checked
And I
in the
guess-
notes, it
yeah,
says 60.
60.
Apologies.
And I guess the importance of getting as close to 100% as possible to make sure that
Absolutely.
It's all
stayed on.
voluntary and I don't know the reasons other than the pandemic interrupted some of that work to be able to, it's quite extensive for the schools to really work to complete that process. But yes, absolutely. All right.
Any other questions? Okay, see you in a few months for budget request.
One more questions. Yes, absolutely. All right, very good. Thank you for that. Before we get started on this, does anybody need to entertain a break at this moment? Or, yeah, let's do that. Okay, I think that the next sections might be lengthy presentations as well. So let's go ahead and take just maybe a 10-minute break. And we'll resume at 10:50.